Welcome on the Verge. This is Zach Spettin, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And we've got a lot of topics to cover. So we're going to look back at the weekend in the Orioles minor league system, talk about some players who were recently promoted, as well as dive into our shout out of players outside the top 30 in our personal rankings for the Orioles farm system. But first, we're going to recap the 2023 MLB draft and look at the Orioles draft class. And we have a special guest on tonight to help us do that. He's a writer over at Future Star Series covering prospects as well as the draft. He is Joe Doyle. Joe, how are you?
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you here. We're big fans of your work over here. I just want to start off with this, which is in a broad sense, how would you evaluate the Orioles draft class this year?
I think the Orioles went the Orioles way, right? I was surprised with the amount of pitching that they brought in. I think that's obviously something that the Orioles not only need, but have kind of they've been middling in terms of developing pitching to this point. But I think they got some really good clay in this draft that could be optimized into starting pitching strength moving forward. But listen, for my money, the Baltimore Orioles always draft off of a specific blueprint, off of a specific model. Uh, Obviously, Enrique Bradfield is a little bit of a stray away from that. He's more of a table setter. He's more of a Cedric Mullins type of a player. He's not all launch angle and exit velocity, but I think he's going to be a quick mover, and I think he could take over for Cedric Mullins, to be honest with you, when he becomes a free agent. But you look at the rest of the guys like Mac Horvath and Jake Cunningham and Matthew Etzel. These are guys that they have typically targeted with those types of traits, and so for that reason, I love the bats that they picked up, but I'm really interested to see if they can optimize some of these arms because they got some really good ones.
Do you think they went with more arms this time around because they're more confident in their pitching development than they were when the Elias and company first came over? It seems like this past year, Justin Armbruster, Alex Pham, Ryan Long have really kind of taken a jump. So you think that has anything to do with it?
It does feel like they may be turning a corner in that regard. Listen, I think it's easy to say that they feel as though they've turned a corner with pitching, but it's a lot easier to look at their farm system and go, they need pitching. The organization just needs pitching. They have 8 top 100 prospects right now by pipeline, and none of them are arms. So I think that's correct. I could be wrong on that, but they just need depth. They need options. The Baltimore is not an organization that historically has spent a ton of money, and you don't expect them to go out in free agency and spend $150 million on an arm, for example. So, you got to bring in the Baumeisters and the Lords and the Levi Wells and guys with big traits and try and optimize those to just continue a factory of reinforcements coming up through Baltimore. So I think part of it was confidence, but I would have to think that if you were weighing it, I would just think that they need arms in general.
We kind of thought we had Michael S. and the Brad Selick and the whole war room over there kind of pegged a little bit after the last couple of years in their drafts, but thought we had a good sense of the kind of players the Orioles like to target. This year, you kind of mentioned it, threw us off just a little bit there, kind of heavy focus on the pitchers who throw really hard, some raw hitters, but do you think the model might be evolving a bit to incorporate where Major League Baseball is going now, or is this kind of looking at the draft class, how that shook out, this is just the Orioles adjusting to what maybe they saw as some of the strengths of this draft class?
Well, I don't think the strength of this draft class was the pitching by any means. I think it was one of the more paltry years for college pitching in quite some time. But they drafted, like Baltimore specifically drafted guys that had really interesting traits. Like Jackson Baumeister throws a really firm, low slot slider with big spin. Kiefer Lord, towards the end of the year, I caught him a couple of times, started throwing this 84 to 85 mile an hour slider with 2-plane tilt, and that's a firm slider. Levi Wells throws a 3,100 RPM curveball. Like Teddy Sharkey has unbelievable stuff. He just is probably more of a closer. Zach Fruit, kind of the same thing. I do think that Jacob Cravey was more of just a straight projection play. But it's hard to find a better operation and a better body than what Jacob Cravey brings to the mound. So that makes some sense as well. But I wouldn't say that Baltimore's model changed per se. I would say that their targets in the draft, kind of what I was alluding to previously, their targets in the draft might have changed a little bit. But the pitchers that they brought in, for the most part, all had a carrying trait. And that is something that I would certainly expect a team like Baltimore to target in any draft. They're not going to go and grab a guy that, for example, like Cleveland is very, very good at making the most out of kind of generic vanilla arms that don't have any carrying pitches yet. Baltimore is not really that way. They're going to try and overpower you with stuff and moldability. So, that's a long-winded way of saying I think they went after guys with really interesting carrying pitches or carrying traits, or things that you can't really teach. And I wouldn't expect anything less from Brad Selick and Mike Elias.
And on the offensive side, it seems like it was a bunch of athletes with some good speed to go along with some good power, especially in Cunningham, Horvath, and good defense. So, what do you think that was about? Was there any just happened to be that way?
Well, I look back at some of Baltimore's previous drafts. I looked at like the Judd Fabian selections and some of the other players through the year, John Rhodes, like some of the other players that they've selected in the first 5 rounds. And for me, it hasn't really been like the speed and up the middle piece of it. And while that is a part of, I think, Baltimore's model, I think a bigger part of it is exit velocities and launch angle dispersion. And that's something that you get like in spades here with Matt Horvath and with Jake Cunningham, especially to a lesser degree with Matt Etzel, although he was kind of one of those types of players in 2022. Tavian Josenberger is probably the outlier. He has some projection left in his body. He plays up the middle of the field, kind of a budget version of Enrique Bradfield, can play a little bit of second base, versatile. But he doesn't hit the ball necessarily as hard as the other 3 that I listed. So I think with Baltimore, they're generally going to go for guys that hit the ball really hard, hit the ball in the air, and have the ability to stay somewhere up the middle of the diamond. And all of these guys seem to check that box.
As well as plate discipline. I feel like swing decisions
doubt.
are the major piece as well. Enrique Bradfield, speed and defense, should play in the major leagues probably tomorrow, but it looks like the bat will be the difference maker between him being a solid reserve versus a high quality leadoff hitter. What specific adjustments do you think he'll need to make to have success as he moves up the ladder?
That's a good question. I've never really thought of the things that he needs to change. I tell you, his profile fits really, really well in Baltimore with kind of that shorter porch in right field and the deep gaps. I think Enrique Bradfield is really built well for Baltimore, and it's a big center field. He's going to have to cover a lot of space, and they don't really have like a prototype table setter right now. I mean, I guess you could say that Cedric Mullins kind of checks that box a little bit, but I think Bradfield has a higher ceiling in terms of his approach and the damage that he can obviously do on the base paths. If I was Bradfield, I wouldn't really change anything. Like maybe hit the ball in the air a little bit more, maybe hit some more line drives. He does hit the ball on the ground a good bit, but like it's elite level chase rates, it's elite level contact rates. The exit velocities are squarely average, which I wouldn't expect much more from a guy that's 175 pounds. Maybe he puts on 10 pounds and he ends up maybe just solid average power. But I think Bradfield's a guy that in Baltimore could end up hitting 16 home runs a season, 12 to 16 home runs and stealing. And I said this in other podcasts, like with where the game is going, if you think Ronald Acuna Jr. has a chance to steal 70 bags, then Enrique Bradfield has a chance to steal 70 bags as well. I mean, he's going to walk, he's going to get on base in different ways. And when he's on base, he's going to run. So I think when you're talking about a guy that's going to play elite defense in center field, cover a ton of ground, steal upwards of 50, 60, 70 bases, you're talking about a guy that could be a 4 or a 5 win player. I would say the only thing with Bradfield this year was his BABIP was so poor for a guy that is as fast as he is. I think his BABIP was something like 275 or 280, which is really low in college baseball. So I would expect that to come up just by virtue of regression to the mean.
The way that the draft was playing out, it looks like a lot of prototypical Orioles targets were on the board with Arjun Namala, Braden Taylor, and Chase Davis. There are a lot of mock drafts leading up to draft night, had them taking Hurst and Waldrop, yet the pick was Bradfield. Did that surprise you at the time?
Yeah. So the thing about the MLB draft that keeps me coming back every year is you think you know what's going to happen, and you think you have a team pegged, and you think you know the trends and the intel that you have is correct, and sometimes it is, and oftentimes with Baltimore it has been, but teams zig when you expect them to zag seemingly every year for every team. Like for me, what I was thinking and what I had been told was Baltimore was down to one of Bryce Eldridge or was it Walker Martin? I'm trying to think of the other player. They were down to those two players. And at the end of the day, or Arjun Amal, I'd heard too. But at the end of the day, when the board breaks in ways that scouting directors and general managers don't expect, every team seems to zag when you expect them to zig. So, I mean, you look at some of the signing bonuses that were doled out, like clearly there were deals that were made 5 minutes prior to the pick being made. So, does it surprise me that they went with Bradfield Jr.? Yes. In the moment when I got that info, I was surprised because he wasn't really the type of player that you would tab with Baltimore. But thinking about it, thinking about Camden, thinking about the way that the organization is currently set up from the minors up, it's a very, very good pick.
Love to hear it. Yeah, I was definitely shocked. That's why I said I'm glad we weren't live when that pick was made. I was not prepared for that one. But yeah, talk about Matt Horvath for a minute there, the second round pick. Just signed Bradfield and Horvath, both signing today. I think Horvath, a little bit underslot pick there for the Orioles. In your write-up on your big board, you referred to him as a wild card in the bunch. What about his offensive profile stands out? And where do you think he ends up defensively as a pro after moving around while at UNC?
So I think they're going to give him as good a chance as any to play third base. It just didn't work with the North Carolina roster construction. Like there wasn't a spot at third base with Justin Vandenbrake and some of the other players that rotated in and out of the Tar Heels over the course of 2 years. And his arm is so strong that it played fine in right field. So I think they'll let him play third base. He can play left and right field as a utility guy and show some versatility, but I'll tell you, like Mac Horvath had suitors in the first round. There were teams in the 2 weeks leading up to the draft I had heard that were thinking of making Mac Horvath their comp A pick on a discount after spending a ton of money in the first round. So I was actually expecting Horvath to go in the 31 to 40 range, and I was surprised when he didn't. But when you're talking about his profile, like big power, I'd say it's pretty much average bat to ball skills. But when you get well above average chase rates, or well below average, I guess is what you'd say. He doesn't chase. He never goes outside of the zone, and he ranks among the elite in college baseball in barrel percentage and average exit velocity. So he hits the ball really, really hard. My issue with Horvath has always kind of been that the swing is a little bit long, but to his credit, it did get a good bit shorter this year. He used his core more and he was a little bit more compact to the ball. But when the hands get outside of his body, that's when he can start to kind of swing and miss at breaking stuff in the zone. So what I would say is, I mean, he's kind of like what they've turned Jordan Westberg into, like a very, very mature, polished hitter who, when he gets the barrel to the ball, he can really hit it hard. And you're probably just going to see like league average contact rates. So what that looks like at the next level, it's impossible to project what that actually looks like when he's a finished product, but he could be a guy that's a 250 hitter with, 22 to 24 homers and a high walk rate. It's a total shot in the dark. It's a guess. We'll see if the swing works against elite level pro stuff, but that's kind of what he's shown to this point.
Certainly sounds like the perfect mold for the Baltimore player development system. So, and as well as another guy we'll talk about in a little bit, but Tavian Josenberger was an interesting pick. He went from being a contact-oriented bat with good plate discipline, but not much power, to someone that most evaluators seem to believe could have low double-digit home run power in his peak. Is the uptick in power that we saw this season sustainable, and is there any more room left for projection on him?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said at the beginning of the show, I think Josenberger can put on 10 more pounds. He really moves well for his size. I think he's still only like 182, 184 pounds, but it's a similar profile, like above average contact rates, elite level, like chase rates. He doesn't chase out of the zone at all. And it's just average to maybe a tick above average exit velocities. And he does have a tendency to lift the ball. So, if you take that entire package and you throw 10 pounds on it and you throw seasoning and, for lack of a better word, like adult man muscle strength, which is a real thing, sometimes these guys unlock a little bit more out of their game.
Wait
I will
till,
be interested to
Kobe
see.
Mayo gets into that.
Exactly, Kobe Mayo. I will be interested to see where they put Josenberger on the field, because he did look like a well above average defender in center field, and he can really go get it out there. But he's also played on the infield a little bit, and maybe they turn him into a guy like a Joey Ortiz, but moving around the outfield a bit more too. So just a really interesting pick. I just thought Baltimore. I know you guys haven't asked this question, and I don't know if you will, but I thought Baltimore and Toronto both absolutely crushed this draft. Like, once you get past day 2 and day 3, those two teams really stand out for just a whole complete draft. And Josenberger's a good example why.
So let's follow up with that. When you look at those two draft classes, Baltimore and Toronto, what specifically stands out, and what can we expect those series in 2027 and 2028 to look like?
Well, I've talked about Baltimore a good bit. I think a lot of it does hinge, this draft class, a lot of it does hinge on whether or not Baltimore can turn some of these arms into good players. I love Jacob Cravey. I think I had him as a 5th rounder. I could be wrong about that. I've seen Kiefer Lord a bunch. When he's good, he's really good. And when he gets hit, the fastball is getting hit. Jackson Baumeister was probably the 5th best college arm in this class. It's a really good slider and a deceptive slot. If they can turn those types of guys into usable, if they can turn one of those guys into a number 3 starter, that's great. In terms of what Baltimore did, or in terms of what Toronto did, I don't know how this happened, but Arjun Namala going 800,000 under slot at pick 20 makes very little sense to me, but it does, it's a feather in the cap to Toronto. Jerron Watts-Brown in the 3rd round after not having a 2nd round pick. I had Jerron Watts-Brown a top 50 guy. It's a plus slider. There's some command issues, but again, like that's real upside in the 3rd round. Landon Marutis in the 4th round. That's a 6'3", 190-pound high school arm that's been up to 96 with serious whip and athleticism. I think you could turn that into something pretty special. Then as you go down Toronto's board, like Nick Goodwin, I had as a 4th rounder. They got him in the 7th round. Powerful shortstop. Sam Shaw, I think I had him as a 5th or a 6th rounder. Powerful second baseman, left-handed hitter. They got him in the 9th round. So, and they got some other little pieces like Brennan Orff, and they got Kai Peterson later in the draft. That Toronto just got a lot of really fun pieces, and Jace Borfrin might be a power hitting right fielder. So I think both teams did a good job of not only following their models and following what they have historically done well, developing and targeting, but I also think they had an appropriate level of safety and risk, and also shooting for some upside. I think you got to do that in every draft. You got to have that one player, even if it's in the 4th round. You got to have that one player that has that star potential, even if it's a massively low floor. Arjun Namala could be a superstar, and I look at what Baltimore did. Enrique Bradfield could be, at least a star, maybe a superstar if he unlocks something else. But Jackson Baumeister and Kiefer Lord and Jake Cunningham, they got guys that could legitimately turn into pretty significant pieces.
Let's talk about Cunningham for a minute. They grabbed him with the 154th overall pick. You had him ranked 94th on your board, and after the draft, Orioles director of draft operations Brad Seelick called him a tool shed, and he's quickly become one of our favorite picks in this class. In your opinion, what kind of player did the Orioles get in Cunningham?
I mean, they essentially got Judd Fabian with 3 more inches. And I don't know if Judd Fabian's going to turn out to be anything, but it's the same type of player that they selected everywhere else. It's a very, very low chase rate. It is mildly concerning contact rates. Like, he's probably only a fringy hitter. Maybe the chase rates bring it up to average, but I think there are serious concerns about if he's going to hit spin. But he's a guy that hits the ball really, really, really hard. I think he was top 30 in the country in average exit velocity. He hits the ball in the air, takes his walks, doesn't strike out to the amount that is totally absurd. I think it's about 25%. So if it all clicks with Cunningham, and he was hurt for a lot of the year, so a lot of people think, the last month that you saw him was the real version of Jake Cunningham. There were people that thought Cunningham was a top 50 pick coming into this season. My reservation with Cunningham was actually always the same as the other player that we were just talking about with Baltimore. Who was it? Matt
Josenberger?
Horvath. No, Matt
Horvath.
Horvath. It's the same thing. Like when he gets in trouble, his hands get really outside of his body. And I think that swing operation can get you in trouble at the next level. But Cunningham is another one of those guys that's 6'4", 200 pounds. Like you put 15 pounds on him, you get him in the weight room, you get him more compact, and maybe he turns into something pretty special. But tons of power, a great body, a great eye at the plate, and now you just kind of pray that it all clicks.
Let's talk about a couple of pitchers here before, because Orioles fans were clamoring for pitching with that first round pick. Pitching. You mentioned the need for pitchers in this system. They grabbed Jackson Baumeister, the highest drafted pitcher in the Michael Ice era, out of Florida
Isn't
State.
that crazy? That's
I know.
crazy.
It's was last year they go Nolan McLean, and he's a two-way player. So they get higher and higher, and it's like they can't even go full pitcher. But this year they do, in Baumeister. But you mentioned earlier that he's probably one of the top college arms available in a draft class that may not have been very deep in college pitching. But what are his strengths? What does he bring into the organization? And what are some things for us to keep an eye on as areas that you think he could probably improve on now that he's in a pro organization?
Yeah, so deceptive slot, lower slot. It's a lower slot for a kid that's 6'4". He gets decent carry on his fastball. Already a super physical kid, like 230 pounds. The slider is the carrying tool here. Like he can rip that thing up to 87 miles an hour. It gets two-plane tilt. It gets depth. The problem is he has to get to it, and the fastball has been what's been beat up a little bit. So if he can find a way to get his fastball in one way or the other into a more weaponized pitch where it doesn't even have to be, a put away pitch, but it has to be a pitch that can, get him ahead in the count and not just be sat on. So I think for a guy that is 94 to 95 up to 97 or 98, really when he's feeling it, you'd think the pure arm talent there should be like the results should be better than what they were at Florida State. So yeah, like the changeup is okay. It's inconsistent, but if he can get to that breaking ball, man, it's a plus breaking ball. It's a put away slider. Some people have some issues with the delivery. If I remember correctly, there's a bit of a hook in the back that some think that it could be a reason why he loses his command at times in the second time through the lineup, third time through the lineup. But the crux of the whole thing here, the whole story on Jackson Baumeister is just getting more value out of his fastball. And I will say, even though Baltimore hasn't done a fantastic job of developing starting pitching that's been effective at the big league level, they've developed a whole lot of relievers that have fastball value. And I think if you can just extract some of that process into a starting pitcher like Baumeister, there's at least a shot that he's a low number 3 starter at the next level.
Another pitcher with tantalizing fastball stuff. Kiefer Lord talked about him a little bit, but it's pretty cool that he went from throwing barely 80 miles per hour in 2020 to touching 99, all thanks to teaching himself on YouTube during COVID. That's pretty interesting. In your write-up, you said he has a premium frame, quick arm, and very real stuff. Just how good is his stuff, and what kind of jump do you think he can make now that he's in a pro organization and have actual instruction other than YouTube?
Yeah. He's interesting. He went from a guy at Carleton College he went from a guy that just threw a ton of strikes, was like 91 to 92, touching 94 at Carleton, didn't walk anybody, just pounded the zone. He had a really humpy breaking ball, but it kind of worked. And he got to UW this year under the tutelage of Jason Kelly, and up to 99. He's 96 to 97 at times early in games, and he would hold it through like 3 innings. The first time, so little bit of history. I saw him 3 times this year. The first time I saw him, it was the same thing as what we were used to. It was 96 to 97, a terrible breaking ball, like a fringy breaking ball with a ton of hump, and he threw like 3 changeups. And I was like, all right, so this is a fastball over everything profile with a great frame. Like, I was like, okay, you can kind of dream on this being Bryce Miller, but it's not there yet. So then I saw him again. I think it was the end of April, might have been early May, and he was 93 to 94. I think he grabbed 95 once, but he was throwing his curveball like 73 to 74. It was a fine pitch, mostly average, but some of the hump was out of it. But he was throwing this 82 to 84, touching. He might have grabbed an 85 with this slider that was sharp. It had two-plane break. And he was clearly working on the pitch because he was just throwing the hell out of it. I mean, he probably threw 15 or 16 of them in the first 3 or 4 innings. And I said, that's a very, very, very different weapon than what I've seen from him. So it has a ways to go, both in conviction and consistency. But I think if you can get Kiefer Lord to the point where he's throwing his fastball, 94 to 96 with the carry that he gets on the pitch when it's right. He needs to stay behind the ball. It's not always a good fastball, but when it's right, he gets a lot of carry on it. If he can get consistent throwing the 94 to 96 with carry, he can start landing that slider at 83, 84, 85, maybe a tick higher than that with two-plane tilt and firm. And he can just use that curveball as a get me over or a spike curveball. I personally think Kiefer Lord has a higher ceiling than what Jackson Baumeister provides. I had Kiefer Lord an end of the second round pick. He went about there. So he's probably my favorite pitcher that I saw in the Pac-12 this year. And he's going to be able to add weight and add strength. So it's a really good body. It's a really good arsenal, but it's very, very green.
We've also seen a stuff jump recently with Zach Fruit, who had been throwing 90 to 93, but then this past spring regularly running 94 to 97 with the fastball, topping out at 99. How much upside is left with him, and what kind of pitcher did the Orioles draft when they chose Fruit?
Yeah, Zach Fruit was one guy the first 3 weeks of the season that was he was like the jaw-dropping kid for me. I was a big fan of Zach Fruit in the 2022 draft. I actually had him as a day 2 guy, 7th or 8th round. He didn't get picked, but I've always loved the way that he moved. It was a bit of a longer arm action, but he's cleaned that up a little bit, and now he throws more strikes. A lot of spin, a lot of carry through the zone on the fastball. I think he touched 99 this season. Actually, he really reached new heights. The biggest thing with him is just breaking ball consistency. Like, he has big stuff, but he doesn't have consistent shape. The breaking ball, he'll lose the strike zone with it. He'll throw it with a hump. It's when it's not right, it's very reliever-ish. So the way that he moves, as good of an athlete as he is, we'll see how long he actually stays a starting pitcher. But he seems like the type of guy that if you just give up on starting and you throw him in a bullpen, there's a shot he's 98 to 99 with an 87 mile an hour slider, an 82 mile an hour curveball, and hopefully he starts just figuring out where it's going. But always been impressed by the athlete, and I think Baltimore really stole one in the 9th round. It wouldn't have surprised me at all if he went a couple of rounds earlier than this.
Nice. I just love all of the as a JMU graduate, I just love all the Sun Belt talent that the Orioles decided to bring in this year. Underrated conference.
Oh yeah.
Tanner Witt, Orioles take him in the 18th round. He's already announced on Twitter that he's got unfinished business at Texas, which I think a lot of people kind of assumed, especially after he fell to where he did. I guess first and foremost, do you think there's still any possibility that the Orioles could still land him, or knowing what you know about Witt, do you think it's pretty firm he's going back to Texas to improve that stock?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of figured it was a foregone conclusion that he was going back to Texas after like the 2nd round. I mean, he's like a 5th generation Texas Longhorn. He wears the school on his sleeve. I mean, it's incredibly important to him. I personally think the Tanner Witt thing was more of an insurance policy in case one of these higher guys, like, they couldn't land Lord or they couldn't land Baumeister for any reason, or they were able to save a ton of money on Bradfield for some reason. And they were able to throw him like $1.1 million. But, Tanner Witt is not only coming back from Tommy John, but he's still recovering from Tommy John. He's been 88 to 90, 91 much of the spring, and onto the Cape. He's been 88 to 90, touching 91, and the breaking ball isn't back. Like, I think if you were to ask Tanner Witt, even Tanner would say, this is not the version of myself that I want to be when I go into pro ball. He's been a guy that's been up to 97 in the past, and with a plus breaking ball. So I didn't think there was any shot that he was going to go to Baltimore unless there was some treasure trove of money that they uncovered out of nowhere. He's got too much pride. He likes his school and he loves his school so much. It just made so much more sense once you got past the $1.5 million bonus, pool area that he would go back.
Yeah, kind of figure that. Looking at some of the other picks, do you see, I know we've gotten this question a lot. Do you see anyone else possibly thinking about going back pro that the Orioles might miss out on?
I haven't done my research about who they've actually signed. Michael Ferret would be one that I would be interested in just watching. He was really good at times at the State College of Florida, and it's a really good fastball when he's right. I would be interested to see whether or not he just decides to go D1 and take another shot at it. But these other guys like the Blake Money and Riley Coopers, and I'm trying to think of who else y'all pulled in. Like Zane Barhart, was that a kid that you guys pulled in? Zach Barhart, something like that. Like, these are all guys that I would expect to sign.
And, other than Witt, there's a couple other potential overslot picks. The two high school players that they took, position players, the outfielder, I don't know how to pronounce it, Curay or Cray Lott, and shortstop Colin Ritchie. The Orioles have a pretty good track record when they do go the high school route. It seems like they don't do it often, but when they do, at least so far, they've been good at it. What should Orioles fans know about these guys, if anything?
So I don't expect them to sign Colin Ritchie. I'd heard that the number was going to be pretty big, but that being said, I mean, nothing surprises me anymore. It wouldn't totally surprise me if he signed. I actually don't know anything about Cray Lott. I didn't have him on my board. I didn't write him up. He's a big kid, 6'4", 170 or something like that. I had to research him after the draft. So I don't have a good feel for him. I think selecting someone in the 14th or 15th round, whenever they selected him, it's always kind of an odd round. It's like, okay, what's the plan here? Like, do you have a deal set up? Are you going to be able to bring him in? So I can't give you much on Cray Lott, but I would say Colin Ritchie. I mean, maybe you save some money by not being able to sign Tanner Witt. Maybe Michael Ferret doesn't go to school, and all of a sudden you can pay $400,000 to Colin Ritchie. But yeah, I don't know anything on Cray Lott, unfortunately.
Vivek has an interesting question in the chat. Is there any chance Teddy Sharkey could be given a chance to start in this organization, or is he pure reliever?
Yeah. Listen, you're talking to like one of the number one Teddy Sharkey fans on the internet right now. That guy is an absolute psychopath with absolutely insane stuff. Teddy Sharkey is kind of crazy. Like, that guy is really, he's like John Rocker, but with breaking balls. I don't think there's any shot that Teddy Sharkey is going to start, even though at their best he has, and I wrote this in my blurb, 3+ pitches. Like, fastball could be plus, slider could be plus, curveball could be plus when they're good and when he's actually commanding them. There's enough effort in that delivery. The strike throwing ability is a concern. It's not a great starter body. It's more of a reliever body. For that reason, like, I think he's an 8th inning guy. But that's still, hey, 8th inning guy in the 7th round is good money.
That's fine. I love, you call him a psychopath. I'm sold. I think I saw one of his coaches on Twitter call him a psychopath as well. I'm like,
he legitimately is. Like, the coach wouldn't just say that. Like, I probably watched him close out like 5 or 6 games just because of the stuff. And he is a psychopath. Like, he is out of his mind in a good way. So it'll be a fun one to. And you guys are going to get the Baby Shark song coming into Camden, which I'm so glad I don't have to listen to that. But to each their own.
Yeah, if teams were mad at Brian Baker for his antics, can't wait to see when Sharkey gets up to the major leagues.
Yeah.
We've touched on this a little bit, but looking at what the Orioles did on the 2nd and 3rd days of the draft, were there any picks that maybe stand out to you as under the radar guys we should have our eyes on?
So the one guy, I'll bring this guy up because he surprised the heck out of me. I went and watched Nestor Herman throw. This is probably in March for Seattle U. I'm up here in Seattle. And I don't know if this is under the radar. I guess it's maybe a what do they know that I don't know? Nothing stood out for me. maybe that was a local area scout gut feel type of guy, or maybe they got their hands on, TrackMan or Hawkeye stuff that I hadn't seen. Seattle U historically doesn't share too much of that sort of thing. So you're flying blind in terms of like I can look at Teddy Sharkey's numbers and just say, this guy has insane stuff. Nestor Herman, we don't have visibility into any of that. But he's a big kid. He's barrel chested. He certainly looks like a 5-star quarterback out there. Um, I wasn't. Let put it this way. I didn't even write him up, and he's in my backyard. So there must be something pretty special there, or maybe his stuff got louder throughout the year. But I am looking forward to seeing what he does in pro ball and seeing why I'm so bad at this. So that's good.
We'll wrap up with this one. You've already got a mock draft up for 2024. Can you give us kind of a preview of what to expect with this draft class? Is college pitching looking better? Is this the year of more high school bats? What are some of the strengths and weaknesses you're finding with this class already as you look ahead to next year?
Good question. So I've taken in 3 high school tournament / showcases already. Going down to area codes in a week and a half to take in pretty much everything west of the Mississippi River and see a long extended outing there. I'm fairly worried about the high school class in 2024. Derek Curiel, Owen Pano, Bryce Rayner, Caleb Bonemer, PJ Morlando, Connor Griffin. Like there's 5 or 6 guys that are probably legitimate top 50 type players. Behind that, right now it looks pretty thin. The college bats are okay. I think Weatherholt and Bazana and Kurtz and Honeycutt are all really good, and Tommy White's really good as well. But there's a lot of question marks there too. I'll sum it up like this: it doesn't look like a terribly deep draft. I think it has potential on the college pitching side with some different guys that aren't yet throwing hard. But for me right now, I'm kind of just waiting to see what pops because, listen, a year ago, I was looking at the 2023 draft and going, this is good. This is good. There's no doubt about it. I'm looking at the 2024 draft right now and I'm saying, this is not good. This has a ways to go. So hopefully some of these high school arms, some of these high school bats, some of these college arms, someone will unlock a little bit more this fall going into 2024 to get me a little bit more excited about the class. But for now, if you were asking me to put Vegas odds on it, it does kind of look like it might be the weakest class since 2020, but we'll see.
Well, Joe, thank you for coming on tonight. We really appreciate the insight. Can you tell our listeners where they can find your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Joe Doyle MILB. You can find all my draft write-ups at futurestarsseries.com. And if you're really into the draft, I do a weekly podcast. It's about 45 minutes each week, Overslot or patreon.com/Overslot.
As someone who signed up, when you released that Orioles episode, you sold me. It's worth
good.
It's worth $5. So
yeah, I've had Brad Seelick and Mike Elias on the show. So we'll continue getting Orioles guys on for you.
Awesome.
Love it.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
All right, guys. We'll see you.
All right.
Have a good one.
That was Joe Doyle of Future Star Series giving us some really good insight into the Orioles 2023 draft class. So, Bob, Nick, now that we've had time to react to the draft class ourselves, and that we've just heard from Joe and gotten that insight, what are your takeaways from the 2023 draft for the Orioles?
It kind of just reinforced my opinion of what I was already thinking. I was talking about it in the WhatsApp group. I love this draft class. It's my favorite draft class. Just from immediate reaction while it's happening. I think there's been other ones where it's like after a week or so, I'm looking back and thinking, or even after a year later, I'm like, oh wow, that was actually really good. But right off the bat, I love the depth. And when he was saying it was top to bottom pretty good, that made sense to me. Love the ceilings of some of these arms and some of these bats as well. So yeah, it just reinforced my opinion that they continue to kill the draft.
I need Teddy Sharkey in a uniform tomorrow morning pitching. I want to see the psychopath pitch. But no, I'm excited for the pitching. I love saying Jackson Baumeister here, pick 63rd overall. If the Orioles can unlock something there and turn him into a mid-rotation starter, that'd be fantastic. But Kiefer Lord, I know I forgot that Joe was Seattle-based and had probably seen Lord a lot, so it's good to get his views on Lord after watching him a couple of times. I'm even more excited about what he's going to bring to the organization, and now that he's in a pro organization with real instructors who are going to teach him the art of pitching. And we've seen what this organization can do with guys with less talent and what they're turning them into. They're not turning these guys into stars, right? But you're turning guys like Alex Pham and 18th, 19th, 20th round draft picks into guys who are having success in the AA and AAA levels right now. So to see a lot of the pitchers, Levi Wells, we didn't really talk too much about Levi Wells. I just think a lot of the pitchers, especially the guys drafted early on, they have some of the stuff that I don't think too many pitchers in this organization have. And so it's going to be a lot of fun to see what this player development staff can do now that they got their hands on them.
Completely agree. That's kind of what stands out from this draft class. And it's something we touched on a little bit last week, which is just the number of guys that throw hard. Because to this point where the Orioles have had success, or where they appear to be setting themselves up for success, is with guys like Justin Armbruster, who just have these really good pitch mixes, but aren't really getting by on velocity. You've got some guys in this draft class that are pumping high 90s consistently. And Joe's insight on Zach Fruit was really interesting to me, because that was someone who, when I looked at day 2, saw some things there that I liked about him, but I think I was more so focused on Kiefer Lord and Jake Cunningham, that Fruit didn't really stand out to me. But it feels like this is a guy that has some real helium coming into the system.
Yeah. I know people right after the draft, you're looking at who's over slot, who's under slot. All right, how are we going to get Tanner Witt signed and all this stuff? How are we going to get these high school kids signed? I looked at Fruit and Bragg, like they're 4-year starters down there in college. I honestly, without diving into their stuff, my initial thought was just kind of like, all right, they're going to give Fruit and Bragg like what, $5,000 signing bonuses each. So who are these guys, like Delmarva bound? Like that's about it. I love what Joe had to say about Zach Fruit there, but it's good to know that there's definitely a lot more in the tank there, and they might still only get $5,000 or $10,000 signing bonus, but they're going to be legitimate arms here.
Yeah, and I loved what I heard about the guy in his backyard. Was it Nolan German? The fact that nobody knows anything about him, love it. That means the Orioles know something we don't, and I can't wait to see what it is eventually.
There is nothing. I searched for probably an hour on the depths of the internet to try to find something on Nestor Herman, and there's not a single thing. It's just Nestor Cortez or someone else named Herman in the major leagues. I don't know. The other Yankees guy that's Herman, Domingo Herman. There's literally nothing on this guy. So get to Delmarva so we can get our eyes on you.
There's always like one stray video or a stray article out there about a guy. So it's interesting. You couldn't find anything at all of Herman.
No, I found one video. He was in his college locker room. They were talking to him, and he was just like, I was born here in the U.S., but I lived in Mexico for a little while. I think his parents are Mexican, and he was just like, I played baseball. My dad taught me baseball. I love baseball. It's like, I got nothing from it. Literally nothing on this guy.
Can't wait to interview him on the show.
Yeah, and hopefully we will get a little bit more insight and be able to share that not only with the listeners of our show regularly, but also with members of our Patreon community, of which we have a few new people to welcome tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, a couple here. Makes it a little difficult now with Patreon having the 7-day free trials. I swear I've said Vitor de Souza Silva is a patron, but it shows him at the top now. So I'll give him another shout out. You also got Jeremy Reynolds, Bobby Jones, and Paul Jones. I wonder if they're related. Just also wanted to shout out for our Patreon. One of our patrons, Santiago, came out with a podcast we released on our feed, Between the Numbers, a deep dive on Dean Kramer. It's well worth checking out. I'm going to put it out on the main feed Wednesday morning. Kramer's next start against the Dodgers, but you become a patron, you never know what could happen. You can have podcasts on the network.
Yeah, absolutely. And We'll talk now about this past weekend in the minor leagues. It was a short week for the minor leagues. They only played games on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but there was plenty of action with several players making their debuts at higher levels, including Kobe Mayo at Norfolk. You had Jackson Holiday making his first appearance at Bowie. And the first night Jackson Holiday is there, John Rhodes actually steals the show by belting 3 home runs in that game. You also had some high-scoring affairs over the weekend with Aberdeen blowing out the Wilmington Blue Rocks on Friday night, and Norfolk getting a high-scoring victory as well. So not a ton of action last week, but yet a lot of things compressed into a few days. Nick, I'll start out here with you. What stood out?
Kobe Mayo's debut in AAA. We're going to talk about that for a minute. His first at-bat showed you everything. Bases loaded, first AAA at-bat. He's down 0-2 in the count, and he draws a walk. I mean, plate discipline, unmatched. He's got a couple of hard hit balls. I think his first hit was, of course, a double at what was like 100. Was that the 111 or something miles per hour? Almost 112 miles per hour. I think last night he had like 106 mile an hour, 103 mile an hour ground outs, a couple batted balls over 100 miles an hour. He looks fantastic in a Tides uniform. It's going to look even better in an Orioles uniform. It's good to see him finally up there at the AAA level and doing a lot of the same things. You know, he had a couple of hits over the weekend, a couple of walks. So good to see that. Heston Kjerstad, honestly, I know he's been there at AAA, but just looking at what Norfolk did, I watched a lot of Norfolk over this weekend, and to see what Heston Kjerstad is continuing to hit the ball extremely well and not strike out. He only struck out 1 time over the weekend. So that elite plate discipline still showing out there for Kjerstad. Joey Ortiz, plenty of 100-plus mile per hour hits, had 4 hits over the weekend, double, triple, had a great, I think it was a home run shy of a cycle on his birthday. I mean, the Norfolk bats, Connor Norby had a pair of leadoff home runs in 2 of the 3 games. I mean, a lot of these top prospects, you got Westberg in the majors now, you got Colton Cowser in the majors now. Grayson is back in the majors pitching. I think he just came out as we started recording this, but looked fantastic through the first 3 innings that we were able to watch before we started. But you got more of these top 100 prospects in Norfolk playing extremely well as we head towards the home stretch of this season. And it's going to make for a fun last couple of weeks here as we wrap up the 2024 season.
Yeah, that was great stuff. And for me, it was just the pitching. I know they did this last year where a bunch of guys throw shorter innings out of the break, I guess, just to kind of give the arms a rest and let everyone get into the game after having most of the week off. But it also allowed a bunch of these guys that had moved up to make their debuts at the next level, like Chase McDermott pitched his first AAA innings, gave up 2 runs over 3 innings. But, you know, you had Ryan Long make his AA debut, 2 1/3, scoreless with 3 strikeouts. The one guy that didn't get a chance to get in was Jared Beck, who got moved up to high A. But also love that Brandon Young, who I was about to just give up on completely, all of a sudden, hey, he's back. He's pitching. He struck out 5 in 2 scoreless innings. That's cool. Kyle Branovich continues to make his march back from Tommy John and looking great. Can't wait to see him get back to AAA and maybe to the majors this year, which would be a great story. And who was the other one? Isn't there another? Juan Rojas. Yes, Juan Rojas is finally back. We don't know why he was out, but he's back, and he has not given up a run yet. So it was the pitching for me just as a whole.
I want to take a little bit deeper dive into Rhodes for a minute. 3 home runs in Friday night's game. Unfortunately, it went down as a loss for the Bay Sox. But after an excellent June, Rhodes had gotten off to a little bit of a slow start before Friday night's game. And it was interesting because just a few days before that, there was an article that came out in the Chattanooga Times Free Press, which is Rhodes' hometown, Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he gave some insight into how hard he's been hitting the ball this year. And Nick, I know you shared that article on Twitter. What stood out to you from some of his quotes?
I loved that article. I don't know how I found it, but I'm glad I did. It was during the break, and he mentioned that some of his exit velos in the month of June were like top 10 in baseball for how hard he's hitting the ball, and that he had never been putting up those kind of exit velos in his career. So up to this point. So that was really good to hear. Just other things too, like how comfortable he's feeling, the relationships, him being able to text Adley whenever he wants to get advice, and how the guys are watching what Colton Cowser is doing in the major leagues and watching his at-bats and breaking those at-bats down. So it's just really awesome to hear or to see some of the quotes that he put out there and how he's progressing. And yeah, it's last year he had the injuries. What was it? A wrist? I think it was a wrist that he missed extended time. We thought he'd be back and he ended up missing a couple more extra weeks. I wonder how healthy he was for the rest of the season, pretty much the entire second half of the season. I don't think he was very healthy. Wonder how much that wrist kind of hindered him. But I mean, he's been on a roll here for the last month and a half. I mean, he's got a WRC plus of 137 since June 1st. His OPS of 878. He's walking more than 10% of the time. The strikeouts are high, but one other thing we know a lot about John Rhodes is that when you throw John Rhodes a strike, he's not going to swing and miss at it. He's one of the best in the organization at in zone whiff rate. So it's good to hopefully he's putting it all together and it's finally clicking for him, because I know he's a guy that I know all three of us have been high on and waiting for that breakout for a while now, and maybe we're seeing it here now.
Yeah, completely agree. And if you want to check that article out, if you haven't had the chance yet, it's over at Chattanooga Times Free Press. Patrick McCoon was the reporter who wrote it. Definitely some good insight there. So you should check that out if you haven't had the chance already. I also wanted to mention before we get into our final segment, Jackson Holliday off to a very good start with the Bay Sox. Through his first 3 games, he's 6 for 12 at the plate with 2 walks against 2 strikeouts, seemingly picking up right where he left off as he had been hot at Aberdeen right before the promotion.
You mean opening day shortstop for the Baltimore Orioles, Jackson Holliday? Yeah, no, it was cool to see him get up there. And there was an interview before his first game when he talked about, crazier things could happen than him making it to the majors this year. So love the confidence, and clearly the Orioles are going to push him as high as he can go, given the talent that he has. So, yeah, continues his just skyrocket, or what's Michael Elias's favorite saying? Lift off through this organization. He's probably going to play at all 4 full season ball teams this year, because AAA ends a week later than AA, and I would imagine he gets moved up then. So just fantastic story. Continues to be before he's 20 years old in the major league. So look forward to that as well.
Yeah, and the Tides have also already clinched that championship spot. So they're playing even longer. And so imagine the season ends and maybe Kerstad does get called up at the end of the year and he's up in Baltimore. And the Tides go back home to Harbor Park. They got a championship series. They're going to try to win a AAA title in the year on a high note. You just get to add the top prospect in baseball to your roster. That's going to be a lot of fun. I've seen a couple comments too that I know we've gotten online, and I don't know if you guys have thoughts on this, but people already concerned about like Holiday, a lot of singles and doubles, and when are we going to start to see the power? And people already talking about the power numbers with Holiday. Like I would just say I got 2 comments like back to back the other night after he hit the double, and he only has 7 home runs I think on the year or something. Jackson Holiday is already bulked up a ton from last year. He was looking I don't want to say scrawny last year during the draft, but he looked like he was 9 years old when the Orioles drafted him. He is bulked up considerably just in this one offseason. And honestly, like I'm not concerned about it at all. Like those singles and doubles are going to start turning into home runs eventually. The rest of his numbers are just mind blowing for his age and how fast he's progressing through the system. And honestly, the only other thing I'd say is if the Orioles were concerned about it, he wouldn't be in AA already. So like, don't worry about Jackson Holliday's power or lack of power he's showing right now. He's the number 1 prospect in baseball for many reasons. And eventually what power he is going to show, like that is a big reason why as well.
Yeah, not worried about his power whatsoever. Go watch him hit some batting practice. The raw power, he got the strength, and his frame is plenty big enough to add much more power as he's only 19 as he grows. Yeah, his biggest issue right now is he just hits the ball on the ground a lot, which is something Gunnar Henderson did when he was first coming up through the system. Mm-hmm. We've seen this team, this organization correct that, quote unquote. I have no doubt in my mind that he'll be a 20 to 25 homer guy at least once he's, in his full strength and capabilities in the next few years.
Yeah, completely agree. You're not looking for him to have the kind of power that his dad had because he's not going to be the same kind of player that his dad was. Chances are he's not going to be as large as his dad was. So it's a completely different thing. But there's without a doubt 2025 home run power there that can project out because he's only 19 years old. As you both touched on, he's already gotten stronger and he hits the ball hard. It's just that right now he's hitting a lot of sort of line drives that drop in the outfield early or they're ground balls. Those eventually are going to start turning into long drives in the gap. There are home runs or extra bases. It's going to happen consistently. And really the thing that I don't think there's much to worry about, honestly, with Holiday at all as a prospect. Just keep letting him develop, turn him loose, and I think that in a year or two, you're going to have the starting shortstop in the major leagues.
Agreed. And before we get to the last thing, too, there is one other performance I know I enjoyed watching this weekend that I wanted to shout out. And he's not outside of our top 30, so we'll talk about him here. I've been pushing this agenda online lately because he's becoming a favorite of mine, and that's Dylan Beavers. Just because I'm going to try to pull up, configure his stats here so I can look at the right numbers. Just going back to June 22nd. Well, first of all, over this past weekend with Aberdeen, he had 4 hits in 3 games, 2 doubles and a triple, 2 walks, 2 strikeouts, 364 average, a great weekend against Wilmington. But just concerned about Beaver's slow start. We saw this with Colton Cowser. We saw this with Kobe Mayos and Connor Norby's. We saw this with a lot of guys in Aberdeen last year, and those were all more advanced bats. I think guys with higher ceilings, I think guys with higher floors, maybe even than Dylan Beavers. We knew Dylan Beavers was a project when he was drafted out of Cal, and we know the Orioles are undertaking a pretty big kind of swing, I don't know, overhaul, but it's a project bat there. And it just irked me when, you see quotes saying like, rival scouts don't like the swing. It's not good. It's not pretty. The plate discipline, like none of it's there. And he's dropping considerably on the rankings. It's his first full year of pro ball. And since that article came out, this man is hitting 328 with an OPS over 1,000, a 174 WRC plus, 13% walk rate, strikeout rate just right at 20%, ISO of almost 300. Dylan Beavers is figuring this thing out. He's turning things around. He's still like, I don't know where he is on our rankings anymore. He's fringy, top-ish, 10-ish prospect in this system, but I still firmly believe like the ceiling with Beavers, I think, is incredibly high. You're just going to have to let the player development process continue to play out with Beavers and give him a chance. It's going to take a little bit longer, but I think if we continue to give him a chance, we'll be pleasantly surprised with what we see.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's something we've talked about since he was drafted, yet I think just the fact that the Orioles have been developing these guys so fast and they've been flying through the system so much, it's like in comparison to these other prospects who are just like 2 months at a level up, 2 months at a level up, it seems like he's taking forever. But no, I mean, he could be at high A all year, double A all next year, and still be plenty on track to be a really good player in the major leagues one day.
Yeah, I'm getting like kind of strong Colton Cowser parallels here. I think that Beavers, we knew coming into this year, was a lot more raw than Cowser has been at any point when he was in the Orioles system. So it's not the best comparison, but in terms of their trajectory development-wise, I kind of see Beavers as this year's Cowser, where you have that slow start. The numbers are a little bit disappointing in the beginning. You start to doubt anything that you may have thought good about him previously. I never did with Cowser, and I honestly haven't with Beavers either. But you can sense that the outlook on them is turning in some corners. And then all of a sudden it clicks, and it's like, oh, this is what we were waiting for. This is the kind of gap power that Beavers has been showing lately, just constant extra base hits. And you're starting to see that this is going to be one of those guys that when he gets to Bowie, the home runs are going to show up. And I could see him hitting well at Double A once he gets there.
Pause just to give Brian some stress while he's watching this, and as well as the Dodgers-Orioles game. Yeah, no, it's a good point.
And with that, we'll head into our final segment of the night where we shout out players outside of our top 30 for something they've done recently, whether it's been a good game, a good week, a good couple of weeks, or just something interesting in the stat line that we want to note. And I'm going to start with Bob this week, who I think has some guys you want to have on your radar for the rest of the summer.
Yeah, a position player who I feel like, yeah, he's been around since the 2021 international signing period. And I guess it's just a case of I forget how young these guys are sometimes when they get signed. But Anutis Mordan, I feel like they're. What was the joke I was going to make? I feel like there might be something more than we thought before this season because he is just 19 years old, 6'1" catcher / first baseman. He was in the DSL the past 2 years, didn't hit a lick really, but he came into this year and had 60 plate appearances. He's walking over 20% of the time, striking out 18.6% of the time. He's got an ISO of 404, 4 doubles, 5 home runs already, a 198 OPS. Just like the bat has just exploded out of nowhere, and it's more than just like power. It's like we talked about with Rolfie Cruz, who has struggled in full season ball. That is a big jump, but just the walks are way higher than they ever were the past 2 seasons. Strikeouts way lower, kind of like at the Creed Willems thing, another catcher. Just the stuff behind the scenes is kind of matching the production, and I've even seen his name come up on some like analytics tweets about guys who are destroying the complex leagues, and just thought he deserved a shout out. Only 19 years old. He could be at Delmarva at some point before the season is over, and it would be well deserving. And then another guy, another FCL guy, Brainer Sanchez. Actually, he's in Low A Delmarva now. That's why I wanted to give him a shout out because he's reached that full season ball. 22 years old, 6'4", right-handed pitcher. He's got a 1.80 ERA in his first 5 innings, 3 saves. Nope, 1 save, sorry. 1 save so far. He's striking out. Load. Please just load.
A bunch of guys. Striking out
a lot
everybody.
of guys. 11.2 guys per 9 innings and walking under to 1.98 with a 3.29 ERA combined between the FCL and Low A with a 3.27 FIP. So, yeah, shout out to those young guys.
Love both of them. I think, yeah, you can move Mordon probably up in Delmarva soon and give Basayo the bump up there to Aberdeen. I think Adam Retzbach's done for the year. So that opens up a spot there in Aberdeen's roster. I'm going to stick low level as well. I'm going to go my hitter first. I'm going to go low to the DSL. Luis Vicioso, a little bit older. He's 20-year-old. This is Jorge Mateo's brother. He is a catcher, but I think he's played first base like pretty much every game in the DSL this year. Just signed as part of this year's class. Hit his first home run. I think he posted clips from like every single angle possible on his Instagram. If you want to check that out, it was good to see. This guy has got some pretty incredible just raw power for, at the DSL level, obviously, but he's played 24 games. I just want to shout at his stat line. I know DSL stats, they are what they are, but still he's a little bit older, but he's hitting 370 through 24 games. He's got an OPS of 953. First home run, like I just mentioned, 6 doubles, 2 triples, only 14 strikeouts, only 6 walks as well, but strikeout totals is low. So, Jorge Mateo is iffy. If you're a Jorge Mateo fan, or if you're not, then Jorge Mateo doesn't seem to get a ton of love some nights. So we'll give his brother a little bit of love here on the show. And then for my pitcher, I'm going to stick to Delmarva as well. We got lots of Delmarva pitching to talk about here to wrap up the show because these arms are starting to flourish down there at the low level. I'm going to go Edgar Portis, a guy who last year was not good, and he wasn't on my radar to like watch or pay attention to. Honestly, when he would come into games at the beginning of the year, you hit the fast forward button to get through the rest of the game. I really wasn't paying attention to him, to be honest. And the other day, I believe it was yesterday, he struck out 6 guys across 5 innings. He didn't walk anybody in that resumed game that got rained out, suspended on Saturday. Looks fantastic. And just the jump he's made, he's again one of these guys who he's only 20. I don't know when he turns 21, but I don't think it's for a while. But signed in 2019, back when it was the July signing period. So again, one of those things where you don't realize how young these guys are when they sign. Still just 20 years old. Last year in Delmarva, 57 innings. He had an ERA of 6.32. And he had 49 strikeouts to 37 walks. But this year, he's at 58 innings, so just about the same. ERA is down to 3.84, and he has 75 strikeouts to 25 walks. So Portis is on my list, and I got some free time later this week. I'm gonna go back and rewatch that game against Salem, and next time he takes the mound, I'm gonna pay extra close attention to him. See what we got here.
Yeah, I feel like all these international guys in Delmarva the past month have just been lights out. I feel like a lot of guys that had 5-something ERAs a month ago now are in the threes, and it's pretty cool to see.
With that, I'll actually start with my pitcher, and that's Davy Cruz. This is someone who is certainly flourishing at Delmarva lately. Cruz actually got some attention last year for a solid year at Delmarva, but he went back there this year. Really, I think to work on his command, and the walks still could be lower than they are, even though he has improved in that area from last year. But he has been pitching really well lately, a trend that continued during Sunday's doubleheader. He came in relief of Zach Sowalter, delivered 4 shutout innings, allowing just 2 hits with 4 strikeouts and no walks. And in fact, over his last 3 outings, Cruz has been excellent. He's recorded a victory in all of them. That includes 1 start and then 2 long relief outings. In 13 innings pitched, he has struck out 11 batters, walked just 4, given up 8 hits, not allowed to run, and 62% of his pitches have been for strikes. So Cruz is a guy with good stuff. I think he's just on the outside looking in of our top 30 now, only 19 years old, and now seems like he's really turning a corner after mixed results over the first few months of this season. And then for my hitter, I got to shout out Billy Cook. His 2-for-5 performance at Akron or against Akron on Friday continued what has been an excellent 2 months from him. We're seeing a lot more power in that spin, and also continuing to steal bases. I believe he's 14 for 2 or 14 for 16 in stolen base attempts since the beginning of May. So he has been excellent to plate.
I'm trying to pull up his season-long numbers. Billy Cook hit like barely 100. I think he hit 103 the first month of the season. I'm like, all right, he's maxed out. He's done. This is just pure raw power. He's 9th or 10th round pick. It's all right. That was fun. He's in AA. He's overmatched. But my man now has a 114 WRC plus, 261 batting average on the year. The walk rate's up to about 10%, 11 home runs on the year. The swing is funky. The setup is weird. He's a corner outfielder who hits bombs, but he can also play second base. And yeah, he's 17 stolen bags. He stole 25 last year. He stole 32 last year across 2 levels. I don't know what to make of him because everything is just weird, but it's working right now, and I love it. I love Billy Cook at this point.
It's so ugly. It's beautiful.
It is.
So before Google Chrome crashed, I was going to read this off, which is that since May 2nd, Cook has batted .305 the .920 OPS, 11 homers, 45 RBI. So he has been nothing short of impressive over the last 2.5 months. And with that, we will wrap up this episode of On the Verge. Thank you so much to Joe Doyle of Future Star Series for joining us to recap the Orioles 2023 draft class. Thank you for tuning. For those of you who tuned in live while the Orioles and Dodgers were on, thank you. We appreciate you splitting your viewership or maybe putting the Orioles on the back burner and giving us your full attention. Either way, happy for the support. We will be back next week. In the meantime, check us out on Twitter at BSL on the Verge. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to BaltimoreSportsAndLife.com where you can get the latest coverage on the Orioles, Ravens, Terps, other college sports, and more. And while you're there, be sure to hop on the message board and join in discussion with fellow readers of the site, as well as contributors to BSL. And you can become a member of our Patreon community for as little as $3 a month, have access to our WhatsApp groups, and then at the $5 and $10 levels, have access to exclusive bonus daily coverage. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to On the Verge.